Hi, this is Nancy Ralsma with On Point TV and Quilting with Nancy, and I'm bringing you today the second technique in the Sunset Over Dublin quilt. So that's the quilt hanging behind me, well, at least a quarter of it. It's a lot bigger than it looks back there. Last time when we were together, we made the Road to Oklahoma block, and with that we learned how to make the half square triangles. What I want to teach you today is half square triangles, but it's a different way of making half square triangles. This is a technique called triangle grids for when you need to make a lot of triangles out of the exact same colors. So these triangles are going to be the green and the background. In this case, I'm using the black. And for this, you're going to start by cutting a piece of fabric that is 7 inches wide and about 13 inches long. Keep in mind that this does not have to be a perfect cut. So for instance, I left the selvages on here. It's going to be okay. I need to have it bigger than what I need, so when I'm sewing around it, I'll have places to turn, which will make a lot more sense once I get started. So to start with, you want to put the two fabrics right sides together. These are fabrics that I've already done that spray sizing dunk on, so I dunked them and I stiffened them up, so now they'll stay in place when I'm doing all this stitching around it. For this, I'm using my 4x14 Omni Grid. It's just the right size to get around. And I need to have a marking tool that will mark on my chosen fabrics. So this is a friction pen. I love a friction pen. These are the clickers. They click open, they click shut. And in real life, in case you don't know about friction pens, you can write with them and then you can erase with them with friction. Well, that also means that you can erase with friction in terms of the heat of your iron. So this is one option. So I'm going to draw a line about a 1/2 inch from the edge, and we're going to see how this shows up. Well, that's not bad. I can see that. Here's another option, is a fine point Pigma pen. So not so fine. You don't want to have like the .001. Those are like needle thin. You want to have something with a little substance. And this is a 3. And with this, I'm going to be able to mark a permanent mark. Well, in the case of this block, that's going to be okay because the permanent mark is going to be on my cutting lines. And I really can't see that well with this. So for this technique, I am not going to use my Pigma pen. And the last option is the white chalk. So this is the one from Boheen. This has a 9mm chalk in it that's absolutely wonderful. It's a mechanical pencil, so you can constantly have a sharp. If you're using a pencil that you have to sharpen, then you spend all day trying to sharpen it to keep it so it's marking right next to the ruler. So I really love these, and they come in lots of different colors. You can get white, graphite, pink, and green, something like that. So now I'm going to mark next to this. And let's see which one we can see. All right, girls, what do you think? The purple or the white? I think the white. All right, so I've got my first line. Now this line is going to be about a 1/2 inch from the edge. Then turn it, so now the line you just drew is right in front of you. And now lining up a line of the ruler on that line, on the horizontal, draw another line. So now I have a 45-degree angle. Now turn it one more time. At this point, you want to draw the size of your square. So these squares we want to have finished 2.5 inches. The exact size you need is 2 7/8 inches. Now on the Road to Oklahoma block, I cut the squares 3 inches and then I trimmed them down. For this one, we're going to actually draw these 2 7/8 inches. When I'm done, I think you'll find that because of the way this is done, they'll be really fairly accurate and I won't have to trim them down. So I'm going to line up the ruler. You know what, I'm going to brighten up this line. It's still a little bit because it was over top of that purple line. There, now I can see it better. I'm going to line it up now on 2 7/8 inches. So the vertical line is on 2 7/8 inches, and then I'm also going to be checking my horizontal to make sure that I'm square and true. Now I'm going to draw one more line, so I'm going to get 2 sets, 2 rows, almost like as if I had to cut 2 strips. Now they're 2 7/8 inches. Now I'm going to turn it again. So keep in mind, I started here, drew this line, turned it, drew this line, turn it, now drew these 2 lines. Now one more turn means that I can now measure 2 7/8 from the left-hand side, and I'm going to draw all the way across my fabric. So I'm always looking at the vertical is at 2 7/8 and the horizontal is running true. So I need to get 4 going across. Again, this is a technique that you will use when you want to make lots of half square triangles in the same colors. All right? So that's my grid. Now the fun begins. It's time to draw our cutting lines. This is done with a diagonal that runs across the block. Now once you have one diagonal, use that to figure out where your next diagonal goes. I'm going to start here. Now I'm going to turn and go in the other direction. So I'll be doing this all the way across this block. Okay. Now some people might be thinking right now, well, why don't I use thangles? Thangles are made for making lots of half square triangles. I'm not a fan of thangles because thangles to me are you have just that little strip and you're having to start and stop and start and stop, and you've got the paper to remove. Now triangles on a roll is another one, which with the triangles on a roll, what's cool about that is that you do not have to draw all of this because it's actually on the paper, and that works pretty well because you get to sew this same type of design. But you then have to take the paper off. So it's really up to you which method you want to try. All right. So I have my grids drawn. Now it's time to do the sewing. Now, if my sewing machine cannot move the needle to the right, so that from the edge of my foot, the needle going to the right is a scant 1/4 inch, if your needle is stationary, you can't move it, that means you've got to draw more lines. So for those, you're going to have to line up and draw the scant 1/4 inch line all the way across. So I'd start there, then I would spin it, and I would continue drawing all of these until all of these half square triangles looked like that. So they would actually have 3 lines. If your machine can move it to the right so that from the edge of the foot, you've got a scant 1/4 inch. If it cannot move, go ahead and draw the 3 lines. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine. All right, now at my machine, remember, I have moved my needle over so that from the edge of my foot, my needle is a scant 1/4 inch. It's the same distance I use when I'm using my guidelines for quilting seam guide that we'll use a little bit later. For this technique, you don't have to remove that. You can keep him right there. He has got a low enough profile that it's not going to affect what you're sewing. So I'm taking the piece that I did the grid on, and I'm going to be using that center line as my guide. My needle is moved over that scant 1/4 inch. So I am just keeping the right hand edge of my needle a scant 1/4 inch from there. When you get to the end, then you turn. And then you go all the way across, cutting all the way through all of those triangles. When you get to that next intersection right there, stop with your needle down, lift your presser foot, and turn. So you'll go all the way around this block on both sides of the line. So you can see that I've sewn that scant 1/4 inch all the way around. So this does explain why I started the drawing a 1/2 inch from the edge. It's so that when you get to that point, you can actually turn. And as I said, this was cut a little bit bigger than what it needed to be. And again, because it just doesn't matter, I'm going to turn and yep, those salvages are still in there. Now I'm going to cut them off. So before you start, even though I did the spray sizing, you can see that the machine will pucker up that fabric just a little bit. So I always like to give it a good steam pressing, flatten everything out, then take it to my cutting board. So with my cutting board, again, this littler ruler is really nice for this. It's really convenient. And you're going to start cutting on those drawn lines, those first lines that you did the cuts with. So line that one up, cut, and turn. So I like to cut all of the edges first. Whoops, that one I wasn't quite accurate enough. I left a little bit of space. And since I really don't want to have to trim these down any farther, I just want to be pretty accurate. Now, after you have the outsides cut, now you're going to cut the insides. And this is where I'm going to clear off some space on my mat here because I want to be able to turn my mat. Now, it would have been convenient if maybe I had brought my 12 by 18 mat. That would have really worked well. Or my spinning mat. I didn't. I forgot them. So we're going to do this with the bigger ones. So I like to cut the straights first and keep everything still. Try not to move the fabric as you're cutting. Then I'm going to turn the mat instead of picking up my fabrics. So now I can cut one right down the middle to get the centers of all of these. Again, trying to be cautious that I'm not moving the fabric as I go. If that guy moved, let's put him back into trail. All right. Now I'm going to line up to cut the diagonals. So this one's easy. He's just one. But this guy is two going across. Now I have done quilts where I made a grid that was 8 by 8, and I can still do the same kind of, I don't know, I think of it kind of like a little puzzle to see if I can get all of these cut without having to pick up and move things individually. Okay, I got to turn my mat a little bit to get a better angle on this. And now they're all cut apart. So I've got a lot of half square triangles, and now it's time to press them. So when you're pressing, always looking at what the pressing solution is in the pattern. And for this, I believe, let me double check. The pressing solution is to press toward the green fabric. So I'm going to start with the green fabric on top. First flip it up with my fingers, and then take my iron, in. Okay. Then I like to take the second one and lay it right on top. Let me scooch this over a little bit farther. Right on top, and then finger press him up. And you can hear the steam going in my iron. I do like to have a lot of steam. It's just going to, especially because I've already pre-sized this fabric, that steam, I don't know, it sort of reactivates the sizing, and it just keeps everything just flat. I mean, they're just as flat as can be. So I'm going to let those cool a little bit. And now we're going to do the test to see how big are they. These should be measuring 2.5 inches if I'd done everything the way that I should. So I'm going to use just my little 2.5 inch square, cross my fingers, and see what happens. If I can line that diagonal up, they're a smidge big, just a smidge right there. Now I could take the time to just cut off that little smidge and the dog ears, but honestly, dog ears don't bother me. And that little smidge, I'm pretty sure that I can make that work into the block as I'm making the block. So I am not going to trim these all down to 2.5 inches. I'm just going to continue to do this pressing, and then I'll show you the layout for the block. So I have the 16 blocks made, and for this particular quilt, they're all the same. This one's called the Mosiac number 17. Not the most creative name, but that's what EQ called it, so that's what I'm keeping it. And I like to use my ruler, so I'm using my big 12.5 inch ruler to kind of lay my design out, so then I can take it to my sewing machine. I do want to point out that you can still see these dog ears are here. I'm okay with that. It's not going to bother me in the process of piecing this quilt. If they bother you, cut them off. It's totally a personal opinion. So going to my machine, I can just take my little tray of my triangles and set it next to my machine. And I'm going to do the technique that I did last time, where I'm going to piece the rows all as one. So what I mean by that is I start with the first two up here, taking the one from the right, flipping it over onto the one from the left, going to center that up, and yep, the dog ears are there. That's going to be okay. Using my guidelines for quilting to kind of keep my scant 1/4 inch aligned. Stop when I get near the end of the block, pick up the next one on the right, over to the left. Now, for this particular block, yeah, you could just take and sew all of them together into sets of 2, and then sew, the sets of 2 into a set of 4 into rows. But I tell you, I just like this idea of this kind of continuous all together. It just is something that I enjoy doing. If you don't enjoy doing it, don't do it. Do whatever makes you happy. That's what quilting is really all about, being creative and being happy. As I get to the end, I'm going to now take my leader, have that catch that, cut this off. I'm going to cut off the front leader off of this block. Then I kind of lay it down back in place, making sure I've got everything lined up okay. Here's my seams are all on the right-hand side. So now when I flip this block over, the next block will piece on. So taking the right-hand block, flipping it on, and now this whole piece is going to come up with me. Line up my block, sew my scant 1/4 inch. And then now I can just flip this one over, take my third block in the second row, flip it over, lining it up on the right hand edge. So it's just a matter of keeping your, I don't know, your perspective so that you know what side of the block everyone needs to go to. All right, so that guy, and I will continue piecing this entire block until I have all 4 rows complete. Now as I finish going off onto my leader, you'll see that I have all 4 rows done and they're all still connected. So now it's a matter of just kind of finger pressing. So the pressing solution for this is for the top row, the seams to all go to the left. And for the second row, the seams all to go to the right so that those seams will be able to butt together and then alternate the other way. So I'll press those as I go. So with this one, all going to the right, left, the second row all going to the right. I can now flip this down on top and then butt that seam right together, grab a pin, and you'll see how I put my pin in. I don't know if you notice when I do that. Butt that together. Instead of trying to take the bulk of that pin and put it through the bulk of that seam there, instead I put my pin under the bulk of that seam all the way to the end where it stops, and then I put my pin in. I find it makes the pins actually lay flatter that way, and so it actually pieces through a little bit smoother. So now my pins are all in, and I can sew this row together. Keeping my seams flat. Now as I come to a pin, I slow down because I don't want to put my needle, I don't want it to land on top of the pin. It happens once in a while. It usually, the worst part about it is it startles me and I'm like, ah! But other than that, it's not a huge deal. If you do it a lot, it can actually send your machine off timing. So just don't do it a lot, okay? Don't hit the pin so you can do this. Grab my leader, sew off onto the leader. So working with 2 leaders here, so I'll have one down here waiting to work and then the other one on the top, taking my pins off. Now the second row was pressed to the right. So my third row, let's kind of get that out of my way. My third row will be pressed to the left. So just alternating the pressing solution so that your blocks will or your units will actually piece together nicely. Then this flips over on top, and then I'm going to continue to do that pinning for all of these blocks. So the block is completely pieced, but as you look at it, you're thinking, hey, that looks kind of messy, because I did not press the rows as I went. Remember, I just kind of finger pressed them. So now I press them. Again, you don't have to do it this way. You can put them one block together at a time, making them all into the separate rows, completely up to you. I give myself a little bit of steam there. I just find this to be pretty quick, and I love that I'm keeping it organized. Now to get this seam pressed, I'm going to, with my left hand, kind of give it a little bit of pull as I glide my iron over that seam, and then hold it there to get some steam on it. Glide to the next one, and then to the last row. Now after I've done this, especially because it's got this where I pre-sized everything, it's going to be fairly flat, but I'm definitely going to go to the front side. Ooh, look at how good that looks. Everything looks pretty fabulous. Be sure all the seams are pressed flat, always giving it a good steaming. And then we're going to look to see if we can trim any of the edges. Okay. All right, so I do like to let that cool a little bit. Here, let's help it out a little bit. cool it down. Then bring in my cutting board. And the first thing you want to do is see what size the block is. So this should be 8.5 inches. Actually, it is pretty. There's some, like this little guy here, I might be able to trim him off. And then I definitely be able to trim off some on this side and these dog ears. So what I'm saying is trimming. We are not squaring up. You cannot square up a block that has points because you could end up cutting too close to those points. You got to have that scant 1/4 inch to be able to piece it. So using, again, my smaller, skinnier ruler for this, line up the 1/4 inch of those points and trim it off. So I'm sure that I'm not getting too close to that point. I'm 1/4 inch from it. Spin the block. Now sometimes you might have where the points are, you're not able to do anything. The points are too near the edge. Maybe the block is too big and the points are too near the edge. That's okay. You can fix that in post-op. When you're taking that block and you're putting it to the sashings, you can kind of fix it then. So don't worry about it. Now I can cut off those ears. And one more turn, lining up 1/4 inch on the points. And there we go. Our Mosiac number 17 block is done. Next time we're going to use half square triangles to make pinwheels. I'll see you then.